It's easy to look back at American films in the mid 20th century and think that they reflect a simpler, more modest time in this country. But in fact, these distinctions were the result of a strict set of rules imposed on filmmakers.
What?
It's a sort of a paradox because you could say the general effects are very positive. In a sense, American cinema would have never survived without a code.
Prior to 1930, there were no national restrictions on the content of movies.
Oh, horrid.
37 states had voted laws to censor the movie. By mid-20s or so, there were over 100, more than 100 laws censoring the movies in one way or another. So that couldn't be. I mean, how could you make movie to adjust them to all this regulation?
They were subject to local laws in which individual theaters would cut offending content out before showing them, but directors were left mostly free to make films as they wanted. This began to change in the 1920s, when Hollywood's reputation as the capital of film was only rivaled by a growing reputation as a capital of wild parties and crime. After a series of high-profile drug overdose-related deaths and the rape trials of then-prominent comedy actor Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, people from across the country called out, demanding that the film industry be cleaned up, and movie boycotts began taking place. In response, several of the larger studios got together and created the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America.
Quiet, everybody!
The MPPDA acted as a sort of public relations group for the film industry.
They appointed William Hayes, in 1922, I think, basically, and they gave him an incredible salary, which today is shocking because he was paid almost over $100,000 for 1922. It's equivalent more than $1 million today. But he was one of them, and essentially, although he was officially a censor kind of thing, he was protecting them.
Movies were growing increasingly risque as directors and studios found that nudity was an easy way to fill seats. This was especially true after the market crash of 1929 that led into the Great Depression.
Even people like DeMille, who were making religious subjects of those, so-called, would manage to have nude scene in a film, and at the time, people just couldn't deal with it. You can say that essentially the censorship and the code was developed because the complaint and the fact that people in general were shocked by what they saw in the movies.
And still another is at the close of her life.
Hayes was continually pushing for increased restrictions on this garish content, but with profits flowing in, the studios brushed him off. In 1930, however, things took a new turn, when Martin Quigley, a magazine publisher, and Father Daniel A. Lord, a Catholic priest, drafted the Motion Picture Production Code. Hayes adopted the production code, which would later be commonly referred to as the Hayes Code, into the MPPDA.
You want entertainment. Wholesome, interesting, and vital.
He successfully convinced the studios to sign the document using the threat of government regulation, which the studios were staunchly against.
Well, I do hope you've forgotten all about that silly little plan of yours.
Which one?
About blowing up the White House.
Oh, Ma.
Officially, the government was not involved directly in censoring. They understood very, very clearly, very quickly, that if they didn't check things themselves and began to correct things, the government would get involved, and that would be the worst thing that could happen. The other ironic thing, which until late 30s, was a secret, is the fact that essentially the rules and the suggestion made by the code later on are essentially been produced by the Catholic Legion of Decency, and the code was actually a Catholic product. And that has always been, the Catholic Church has always been very, very involved with that for the longest time, and even in the 50s and 60s, they were still publishing the list of the film that they would recommend and those they would not recommend.
The studios agreed to abide by the new rules, but the production code would not be officially enforced until 1934.
It tried several times to enforce it in different ways, nicely and so on. And then finally, after 1930, it became more serious. Until finally, in 1934, after a couple of scandals, it came into effect. And every production had to follow the guidelines. And the guideline produced what? The golden age of Hollywood. The best movie ever made that had the largest impact in the world. To enforce that was to give them a certificate, a certificate after they inspected the film. And if they violated that, there was a fine of $25,000, and they could not collect the receipt from the theaters where the film was shown. So that was very that was a way to force their way in thinking.
This 4-year period between the code's introduction and enforcement is referred to as the pre-code era. Filmmakers in this short period were able to freely skirt many of the rules and create films that expressed their artistic vision in a way that would not be seen again for several decades.
Some of the directors cheated. I mean, they all cheated in some ways or another. For example, you couldn't have a kiss that was more than 15 seconds, something like that. I forgot the length of that. So Hitchcock, when he had a long kiss, he would cut 4 or 5 times. So he could have the whole thing of that. When they decided to eliminate the code, they invented the ratings. So they were ratings of X, G, 13, so they have a second rating that has replaced that. We still exist today. So we still have it in some fashion.